Hey, I
Uh,
took your advice and I watched Jury Duty and I've started
yes,
watching Mrs.
great.
Davis.
All right,
I've
good.
completed Jury. I'm up to
Jury,
Jury,
which is
Jury,
where they judge Jamie Jury
Jamie Jury,
for
Jury,
crimes against gardening.
Jury.
Jury.
He gets judged by he gets judged by plants, not his peers, just a jury made of plants.
Well,
So
no, half a row of plants and half a row of male dancers from so,
because you've got to choose from your peers, so it makes sense. There's the stripper element, and then there is the landscape
yeah,
gardener element.
both parts of his life are reflected in the jury pool. I think that's good for jury.
Man, I did not realize how much I was going to love Jury Duty. I sort of
Mhm.
saw the trailer for it and I was like, I don't know about this, but I fucking loved it.
Yeah.
Like, I loved it. For people who haven't seen it, it is
Spoilers,
essentially.
spoilers, 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 spoilers. There is no way for us to talk about how this show is good. It's been out for a while now.
Yeah.
And I think, like, it- but there is no way for us to talk about how much fun this show is without at least giving away part of the joy of the show. So if you really want to watch the show and you don't want it spoiled, go and
Yeah.
watch it now. It's only like 7 or 8 episodes. They're all pretty short. Like, you
It's
can
so
watch it all
easy
now,
to
come
watch.
back. Yeah.
It's so easily digestible, but
But
it
yeah,
is.
tell me about it. Because I was like, so I'm like you. I'm going into this going, I know what the premise is that like
Yeah.
one guy doesn't know that he's like on a fake jury. He thinks
Mm.
he's on a real jury. And like,
He's
so
been told that he's
yeah,
taking part in a documentary that
documentary
is
about
going
what it's
behind
like
the
to be on a
scenes.
jury. But everybody else in the show is an actor.
Mm.
And yeah, so it's the Truman Show, it's Joe Schmo, it's
Yeah.
like any of those.
Well, that's the first thing I'll say is
Yeah,
to me, it felt like a dated TV concept. I'm
me
like,
too. I was like, why are
oh,
they
well, can
doing
we get this
this?
out of our
Yeah.
systems like the mid 2000s? Why are we bringing this back? But there is a sophistication to the writing
Uh-huh.
and the direction. And then I think there's also a bit of kismet where the guy they've chosen and the story that followed
Apparently,
that
they
unfolds.
had hundreds of applications for this
Right.
television show. And so they had a lot of people to choose from. But because I've read a lot about this since, and there's a lovely little bit at the end. I'm skipping right to the end, but where they reveal the behind the scenes, how it was all working, and how they actually would like what the control room looked like, and how the whole operation was being conducted, and it's just fascinating. And I was so fascinated
Incredible.
by that I was like, I want to know more about how they
Yes,
made this.
you and I did that exactly the same journey. Like I watched that last episode, then was immediately went to any interview I could find about it and just trying to wrap my head around the logistics
And
of what
so
they pulled off.
the toughest thing about it for me, and I think this is just why I've skipped to the end to say this up front, is the thing that makes this work. There is like a key factor that makes it work, which is the casting of this guy who is at the heart of this thing. And we'll get to all that. But the other thing that made it work is that they were willing to film hours and hours and hours of really boring actual legal court jury things, because the way that like when you see it edited together in the show, you kind of start to think like, if all those things happen to me in a row, eventually I might cotton on to the fact that like I am part of some sort of prank. But what they did was buried the ridiculous stuff deep in the middle of all this serious stuff. And the fact that they were willing to put in that they didn't cut that corner. You can imagine another production would have cut that corner, and if they had, it would have ruined the entire conceit of the show.
Because it's all about relationships and human interaction and compassion and all this kind of stuff. Like it sounds ridiculous because you hear the concept and you're like, it's a prank show. But the way they cast it, I mean, there's little elements where I'm like, oh, that feels a bit like, over the top, or it's a bit hammy or whatever. But I think casting is pretty amazing, and the restraint of the performers to know when to push it and when to pull back is phenomenal. Like James Marsden, I like James Marsden, he's fine, but this is an incredible performance, an incredible self-aware, fearless performance. Like he basically plays a douchebag Hollywood prick version of himself.
Yeah, so it's very important that he's not playing a character. He's playing, for the purposes of this, James Marsden, the actor, has been called to jury duty,
Yeah,
and
it's
James
a
Marsden,
conceit.
the actor, does not want to be on this jury, and then but he's just a larger
Calls the
version.
paparazzi,
it's
sets up the paparazzi so he'll get dismissed, but the opposite happens.
I mean, it's incredible. Because his performance, I think, is the toughest performance in the entire show, because
Easily.
like that's the one that if he got it wrong tonally, you could reveal what was going on. But he does this pitch perfect caricature of what that Hollywood asshole would be like in that situation. That is just so wonderful and believable and like hilarious. Like it
Yeah.
didn't surprise me to learn that some of the people behind it had made obviously, proper documentaries, these sort of things, but there was also people from The Office and, like people who
Well, that's what
understood.
it felt like,
Yeah.
didn't it? Like The
Yeah.
Office, like it had the same, obviously because the mock documentary and all that kind of stuff. But there was that compassion, for like it was never cruel to him. Like it
No.
put him in fucking bizarre situations, but he was never the subject of the joke. It was always
Well,
these
the
weirdos
funny thing
around
is,
him.
though, that like sometimes they had put things in that was meant to irritate him. So there's this particular scene where they're sharing, like they're in a hotel, they're sequestered, this jury in a hotel, and like they put him next door to this guy who was meant to kind of like annoy him,
Yeah.
essentially, and he was just really lovely to him
And
and befriended him and
understanding. Yeah.
encouraged him, and it was this
Encouraged
quite
him
like
to
nervous
wear
character, and
to
he's
wear
really
his
trying to
pants,
open
those
him up.
pants with the legs on them. It's just like, I know, it's amazing. Like, and there's some like cartoonish moments. Like he and James Marsden are running lines in his room, and he steps out for a bit. When he comes back, James Marsden tells him the toilet's broken. And when he goes in, there's like a 2-foot turd and like dirty toilet paper, which the production team had set while the guy was out of the room. And he's just so cool about it. Like, doesn't make a fuss about it, just kind of get the plumbing up there.
He's got the most sort of, well, this is what's happening. Like he's got to, because there's moments within where he probably doesn't act in a way that is entirely ethical that you would want from a jury member, all right?
Yeah. Well, he does his own investigation,
Yeah,
which is
you're
like
not meant to do that.
You're not meant to do.
And look, there's jury members like allegedly having affairs with each other and all this sort of stuff that he, because they make him the convener of the jury, like the
Was it
head
foreman?
person or the foreperson of the jury,
Foreman.
the foreman. Well,
The head
foreperson,
person, the foreperson.
the foreperson, the
Oh, yeah,
foreskin
foreperson
of the jury. and so he has to manage all these relationships of the people who are on the jury, and these characters are just like, again, when you describe the highlights, it just sounds ridiculous. But the fact that they were willing to bury, like, I mean, when he's playing, there's that Asian jury member who he's playing that game
the
with,
gambling problem.
and he's got a gambling problem, this guy, and he loses all this money to our hero, and our hero is just absolutely cool about it. Like,
$2,000, I believe it is. He loses $2,000 in a game that he doesn't even understand.
like our hero doesn't understand the game. Like the
Yeah.
conceit is that this guy is teaching him the game, but he's constantly losing this game through these ridiculous, And so our hero is basically, oh no, you don't have to pay me back. And this guy is just committed to the idea that it would dishonor his family if he didn't pay back the money. And it's like, it's so funny.
Yeah.
But that guy, like, I mean, the way that he just handled human relationships in that show, like, was incredible. Like,
Well,
he might be my new role model.
I think it was the last episode, or maybe it was a making of video. There's a whole storyline about James Marsden is waiting to get this script for this film. And he's working with some hotshot director. I think they kind of allude that it's Quentin Tarantino, but they don't say Quentin Tarantino. No. And so that's kind of this thread that runs through it. And then he doesn't get the part. And they have a birthday party for one of the other jurors. And James Marsden turns up and assumes they're throwing him a pity party because he didn't get the part because he's a self-involved actor. And he flips the table, and it's this big scene, this big aggressive moment, and storms off. And in the making of, they're monitoring the lead guy and they're like, oh, he's genuinely upset. And they have like a contingency for that, which is like send James Marsden in with another cake that he's bought to apologize. And it's like, I mean, it's just that level of kind of planning, but also
Well, the
like,
way that they had to pivot, there's that one thing that they showed where one of the actors accidentally called somebody by their real name and not the juror name,
the security lady.
The security lady, and they literally then just had to invent
They've got a
another
name
person.
too in a court. What's the bailiff? She's the bailiff.
And so they had to then invent
another.
Say
bail person is bailiff's gender specific. Bailifa.
Queen Bailifa. It's Queen Bailifa. She's great. So then they invent like they have to constantly be adapting the reality, and there's moments where he starts to suspect that something isn't quite right, and then in those moments that's when they had to pull back and do a big boring day in court just to sort of make sure that he wasn't suspicious anymore. Or
how's the fact that the dude, like, they didn't anticipate how seriously he would take his job as foreman and how hard he would interrogate the facts of the case. So he starts figuring out shit before they've planned it. So they're rewriting on the fly, trying to stay ahead of him because he's actually figuring out what happened.
Because they at the start they create a scenario where he stumbles upon evidence that doesn't necessarily contradicts where the case seems to be going. So that's really clever in and of itself that you put him in this conundrum. But I mean, in highly unethical. They don't let you just go and investigate at these places by yourself. But it kind of is one of those things where, again, like it's a long time afterwards where he realizes that the thing he's seen is the opposite of the way the rest of it is going, because that unfolds. So it becomes more and more compelling that he thinks he knows this thing about the case.
What were the bits that you felt were most kind of vulnerable to exposure? There was a couple for me that I'm like, and one was the performance, and I thought the entire cast was great. So I'm just really splitting hairs, but the guy who plays the nerdy dude whose girlfriend he thinks is having an affair. Yep. I think that guy, there was moments where I felt like he just leaned into it a bit too hard. It felt more performance-y. Like the others, like the Chinese guy and stuff, felt like really authentic. And I just felt moments where I'm like, oh, he seems like he's an actor. Like that seems like something someone from drama school would do.
I agree. I thought that the defense lawyer was too clumsy and too shit. Like, again, we probably saw lots of others. Like they probably showed lots of other stuff where he was being quite competent. But when you clipped it all together, it looked like a sketch.
Yeah, but also I think even the dynamic of making the defendant this kind of Weasley-looking dude, and the prosecution, or what's the plaintiff, whatever. What do you call it? You watch courtroom dramas. I don't know if that's the right terminology. What do you? I mean, if you're the person who's
the person making the complaint is the plaintiff. Yeah,
the plaintiff. Yeah, and she was this really well-groomed kind of like Real Housewives of LA. I just thought the casting of that seemed like the power imbalance and the dynamic was a bit central casting for me. I thought that you could have blurred the lines between just the status level, just blur it a bit more. So it's, because immediately it's a David and Goliath story. And so I would feel like you're going to flip that. But I'm saying that with the benefit of watching a TV show. I'm not in a courtroom looking at these people for the first time. So who knows?
Yeah. And look, there was moments where things were like pretty out there. Like, by the end, like there was some real full-on stuff going on. And you were like, could you just, okay, let me put it this way. Rather than me judging when he was, if you were in that situation,
like I was,
do you think that you would have been taken by it in the way that he was taken by it? How do you think you would have reacted in some of the moments they presented him with?
I always give people the benefit of the doubt. So I would be so compliant with everything. I don't know that I would necessarily be as like compassionate or as understanding as him in terms of just like when they're out of the jury. When I was in
if the jury, two jury members were fucking,
Yeah.
Like
I
if
would,
one jury member was like trying to seduce another jury member, would you like,
inform someone.
yeah,
No.
as the
I'm no snitch.
as the foreskin of the jury, you would not do that.
No, I would tell Queen Bailifa that I didn't know what was going on. No.
If one of the jurors was falling asleep all the time, that was one of my favorite
Yeah.
moments. That gave me
Yeah.
paranoia because I was like me in that situation. I'd be like, I don't want to wake her up, but at the same time, the judge has told me that I'm responsible for making sure that she's awake.
I was thinking from the actress's point of view,
Yeah.
who's amazing. She's probably the best character by far, the most convincing. But I was thinking about that, and it's like, well, they're sitting in a seated court session for what, 5-6 hours.
Mm-hmm.
If I was her, like I'm a younger actor, and I have fallen asleep, like in a scene that takes ages, and you're just in the background. Like the fact that she was able to control when she was not falling asleep is amazing. Like that takes real fucking like effort.
There was one thing that, again, this is not like a criticism of the show, but I was interested, and maybe I just know this person better. But Kirk Fox, do you know who Kirk Fox is? So he's the tall, skinny guy with the mustache who's in the jury, right?
Yeah.
And
the guy loves his wife. No. Oh no, the other guy.
No, the other guy.
The other guy. He used to run a business that was blah blah blah.
Yeah,
he's kind of a southern dude, right?
Yeah. Well, so very tall, very lanky, big
Yeah,
mustache.
I know the
So he's a stand-up, and I've done a bunch
Okay.
of stand-up with Kirk. Very funny guy. But he's been in Parks and Rec as like.
Right.
You're one of those semi-regular characters that might pop up once a season, but he's kind of, technically a character in the show every season. And he was the one. And again, I just didn't know if it was because I know him and I recognize him in these shows because I have met him versus like, I was like, oh, what if this guy had seen Parks and Rec? Would they have had to like work out that he hadn't seen Parks and Rec or something else that Kirk Fox would have been in? Or do you know what I mean? Like that, because all the other actors I didn't recognize from anything else, but I recognized him.
I mean, I think that it's the risk is so low. Parks and Rec hasn't been on. Even if that person recognized him, the chances of him being able, because he wasn't a main character in Parks and Rec, was he?
No.
You know what I mean? Like you could easily, I get that all the time. Yeah, no,
it's true.
I've never even seen the show. I think it's a risk, but I don't think it's a massive risk.
Okay. So you imagine you're in that scenario.
Yep.
And, you've seen a bit of evidence, like the central premise, the big sort of thing that you've seen a bit of evidence that seems to contradict the way that the case has gone. Like, are you like him? Do you try to find the truth? Do you think, or would you just be like, you know what, I could just pretend I never saw that thing at the start?
Yeah, I'd be like a pretender never. Like, whatever makes this the lesson.
When
like,
will this be over?
Yeah, exactly. Hope that I'm never on your jury because whatever is the least amount of work for me, I'd be like, fine. I'm very trusting of people, and so if an authority figure said to me, hey, just stick to these facts and don't do your own investigation, I'd be like, yep, okay, I'll do that. I want to get this done and get out of here. I think I'd be more like the James Marsden character.
If actor James Marsden, you came back to your hotel room after you'd been running lines with the actor James Marsden and he had done an enormous poo in your toilet and then hadn't been able to flush it, would you take responsibility for that poo on behalf of him?
I would, but I'd also fucking tell everyone. I'd tell all the other jurors and I would tell all my friends. I think the guy even says that in doesn't he say that in the last episode that he couldn't wait to tell all his friends that James Marsden had done a massive shit?
I mean, it's a pretty good story, I suppose.
To see the full video, join our Patreon.
Patreon.com/Tofop.